Hey, what's happening everybody? Charles Maring here, and today in the art studio we are continuing my Adobe Classic Masterclass series here on our channel. And today I want to do a couple of tips and tricks when it comes to utilizing the tone curve and how we use tone curve to create some really beautiful high contrast portraits in our studio. First, let's cut to that intro. So yeah, there's more than one way to get from point A to point B in Adobe Lightroom. Tone curve solves kind of one of those problems, making it a little bit easier to add brightness and contrast at the same time. It's a pretty sophisticated little feature. Let's go to the computer and talk about it a little bit. I thought today we'd talk a little bit about the tone curve. Seems pretty natural to do that. If you didn't catch my last video, go back because we did some really creative processing of a portrait here in Adobe Lightroom. A good place to start. If you are kind of up and running in Lightroom with importing already understand the library feature. But we covered that in part 1 and 2. So let's dive in here to Lightroom itself. And I've got a portrait up on the screen here that's a beautifully lit portrait taken here at our Connecticut studio. And it's lit well. I can see there's a catch light in the eye. I've got some backlight coming in from the sun. Really pretty portrait here. But what I want to do to it is give it a little bit of pop, make it really sing. And so I know that I want to add some brightness to it and some contrast. Now, traditionally speaking, I could do that utilizing just the basic panel here in Adobe Lightroom on the right-hand side by bringing up the exposure, because this is a raw file. But that's going to be very flat if I do that. So just exposure alone is not what I'm looking for. I could then add contrast as well and kind of find my way utilizing both of these sliders, but what I really want to do is be able to do that with ease. So I'm just going to zero these out really quick. And instead of using the basic panel, we're going to go down to the tone curve. Now the tone curve is an interesting little scenario here because you'll see that there are different types of tone curves. There's the point tone curve that we're in now, which means you can click on points and then adjust those points within the curve, right? Let me Command Z, kind of get us out of there. We can also go down to point curve. Instead of linear, choose just medium contrast. And that's going to do just that. It's going to put some points already there. It's going to add a little bit of contrast to things. And then we can control these points individually. As you can see, let me Command Z. We don't really want to do that. Let's go down to the strong contrast and it will automatically add some points here. And again, it's much stronger in contrast. We can go in and make some adjustments based on what we think is best. But I don't really want to use that for this particular photograph either. So let's go over to history and we'll just go back to square one where we started with this particular photograph. Well, I need to go all the way down, so let's zero this out again. Okay, so we're back to square one. Generally what I do in tone curve is I use the point tone curve that we just looked at. But there is another option that is a really good starting point, especially if you're just beginning with curves. And that's to go down to the lower right here. There's a little icon, and that's the click to stop editing point curve, and it brings up the region curve. Now what the region curve does is it gives you a little bit of a visual of what your curve is, meaning if I scroll over highlights, you'll see that it also highlights up in the curve area exactly the area that highlight slider is going to adjust. It's going to do it very subtly. Let me zero that out. If I go down to lights, it's going to adjust kind of the lighter part of the image when I adjust it. And if I click and move it, you can see the image get kind of brighter and it's adjusting the lights section. Let's zero that out. The darks is kind of that middle section, lower third. Again, if I lift it, we'll see it lift. If I go the opposite direction, we'll see it fall and we'll see the image get darker. Another way to control it. Zero that out. And then the shadows, the very darkest parts of our print, same thing. I can lift and just to control just the shadows or just darken the shadows by pulling down here. So that's how you can utilize these kind of slider bars to do it, and it's a really good place to start. Let me mention one other thing before we move forward and process this photograph, and that's that in this region section, you're going to see that there's 4 sections just like we mentioned. There's your shadows section here, There's your darks, so shadows, darks, lights, and your highlights. You can also adjust and move your threshold for these over, and then, kind of adjust and it stay within that threshold of whatever you're adjusting. So lots of in-depth, detailed control is available in this tone curve, and the more you use it and get used to it, the more you'll probably love it and start to utilize it in detail and more creatively. So let's just set that back to 0, go to square 1 once again. So I'm going to go ahead and do it my way, which is to close out the region curve here, and we'll use the point curve. I'm just going to click on my kind of middle upper thirds here, and I'm going to lift and add that brightness to this particular photograph. And then I'm going to come down to the lower third, and I'm going to grab it, and I'm just going to my personal taste, pull it back. And that's going to create a very contrasty but beautiful portrait. Let me mention this though. What I find as a professional, personal taste of course, is that when I'm doing high contrast images, especially in color, in black and white, but especially in color, the more contrast I add, the more it just feels too sharp to me. So generally, if I'm doing a high contrast portrait, I will go back up to the develop module, and the more contrast I add, the more clarity I'll pull back, because digital cameras are just so sharp as it is, and then when we add a bunch of contrast, it's making it even sharper. And let me show you what we're seeing here. Inside of this image, what it does is it just brings a little bit of roll off in those highlight regions. And again, the more contrast I add, the more clarity I can get away with pulling back a little bit, and you end up with this kind of soft, velvety kind of portrait. I'm going to bring it back up a little bit. I don't need it to go that far. The other thing I want to mention you have to be careful for when you're doing high contrast photographs, you have to be careful that you're not losing detail in your highlights. I'm going to go up to the histogram here and just kind of scroll over the upper arrow, and anywhere it shows red there, it's showing me you've lost detail in the highlights. And she's backlit with sunlight here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click here so that it keeps the red open, and I'm going to go down to the highlight slider and kind of pull that back, and that's just going to help that area in her cheek where she had a highlight, and we're going to pull that back to where, look, there's almost nothing lost in her hair here, even though it is sunlight that is lighting it. So let me just click on that arrow, turn off the highlights histogram section there. And that's really the kind of thing that I would do to create kind of a high contrast color portrait. Let's show you this in black and white, because with color you can push it so far. With black and white you can push it even further. So I'm going to go and start from square 1 once again, just bring us back to 0 on our exposure and everything else. And now I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to click on black and white. And that's just your basic standard black and white, basically turning it to black and white with simple click of a mouse. But as we go down to the tone curve, same thing here. If we click, we can really create these dynamically beautiful black and white images with an extreme contrast in them. And so same thing as I do with my color imagery, I will want to make sure to probably pull back a little bit on the clarity, and now also a little bit on the highlights here. But what it's allowing me to do is create this really dynamic black and white. And if we want to, we can then go ahead and save our tone curve. If this is kind of the high contrast black and white we look, and we want to be able to apply that curve at any time, we can do that with ease as well. And that's how we'll do something on a black and white. Now, let me go one last step further to talk about the fact that this whole time we've been applying globally to the image. But we can also adjust not the entire image RGB, we can adjust the reds individually. And you see if I pull up, we're adding reds, or we're pulling back, we're adding cyan, because that's the opposite of red. We'll click that back to normal. We can do the same with green. We can add green to our image. We can take it backwards and add magenta, because that's the opposite of green. Command Z to bring us back. And same thing with blue. We can go blue by adding blue, lifting it, and we can go darker to yellow. and add more yellow to our image as well. So it's how you can utilize the tone curve to kind of give some tonality to an image if you want to do something like that as well. To think creatively about it, think about your tone curve in highlights, midtones, and shadows. We're going to go back one more time quickly to the color version of this, and we will quickly go ahead and add our contrast. Boom, boom, get us back to kind of square one. Pull the highlight slider down, pull the clarity down just a little bit, give it a little softness. Now let's go back to colors and just share what you can think creatively about, and that's going into, say, red. And now I'm going to pull the shadows of red up, give a little red in the shadows, right? And then I'm going to go to the blues. We'll add a little bit of blue, or I should say yellow, to the highlights by pulling back on the blue. And that's a fun way to get kind of just a subtle vintage tonality to an image as well. The last thing I want to mention about tone curves, something I don't really use but is certainly something to think about, is that you can also utilize this little section here. It's the adjust point curve, and you basically click here and go into any section that you want to adjust and click and drag low or high, and it will really kind of select the tonality of that particular curve. But it does adjust it globally. So it does change the whole image, which is why I don't really do it that way myself. Generally, I'll just click in and do specifically what I'm looking to do to the photograph to make it sing. So that's kind of an overview of tone curve utilizing Adobe Lightroom today. Guys, I appreciate you guys subscribing to my channel, certainly for Adobe Lightroom. I do other tutorials, a lot of things surrounding Final Cut Pro and Lumix cameras as well, because I happen to be a Lumix ambassador. I am also a pro photo legend of light, so I do some lighting tutorials on our channel if you go through the tutorials and tech section. Lastly, we just crossed the divide of 1,000 subscribers. I want to say thank you to everybody out there who has subscribed to our channel. It's so much appreciated. We love sharing, we love giving back through tutorials, educational content here on our channel. Also, if you don't already know, we have a really fun vlog. It takes you behind the scenes of our creativity that's flowing out of our studio. I'm an abstract expressionist painter, photographer, filmmaker for the past 20 plus years. I play in a rock band, and we have a pretty unique lifestyle flowing out of our studio surrounding all of that. And we vlog about it on our channel constantly, kind of sharing that you can live your dream, be your dream, but we want to definitely say to you, dream big in this industry, because anything is possible. We appreciate you, everybody. Have a great one.